My name is Patricia Park. I live in Brooklyn Heights. Tonight I'll be reading an excerpt from Jane. There was a certain geographical irony of leaving one outer borough for the other. Instead of traveling along the more efficient hypotenuse, the fastest route from Brooklyn back to Flushing, Queens, was making a right angle through Manhattan. I never should have considered that au pair job in Brooklyn in the first place. The whole point was not to trade one outer borough for the other, but to upgrade to the city. We were, after all, bridge and tunnel. All our roads led to Manhattan. It was the borough that burned in its own violet light and threw scraps of shadows on the rest of us. I'd only been to Brooklyn a handful of times in my life. Whenever we drove through, my uncle would make us roll up the windows and double check that the car doors were locked. He'd written off the entire borough after a fruit and vegetable he owned on Smith Street burned down during a blackout. He'd stumbled home that night with burnt clothes, a black eye, and a busted rib. Since then, his mind conflated the three Bs: Brooklyn, black people, and the blackout. Add to that one more B, a baby, a bundle of joy. Me. I was a burden, the daughter of his dead younger sister who'd gotten knocked up by a GI stationed in Seoul, which made me a honyeon, or a mixed-blood bastard, to boot. At 42nd Street, I transferred from the F to the Flushing-bound 7. There was an unmistakable rattle whenever you stepped aboard the 7, like the train cars were hinged together by a single loose pin. At the next stop, the last stop in Manhattan, most of the white people left the train. The faces that remained repeated in a pattern: Korean, Hispanic, Chinese, Chinese again, Indian. Where were they going? Where had they been? You could always tell by their worn expressions: home from work. You could always tell by their worn shoes, all sharing the same thick rubber soles designed to absorb the work of the day. We were stuttering our way back to Queens. The 7 train was like that, torredic. It darted spastically along the tracks, lights blinking on and off, the rickety train cars jerking side to side as much as front and back. The 7 emerged above ground. Behind us, the silvered peaks of the Midtown skyline glinted before fading from view. Ahead, the vista of Flushing. First, you saw a beautiful clock tower sitting on top of a concrete storage warehouse with loud capital letters, UHAUL. The Van Wyck snaked its way through heaps of sand and ash, through auto body shops and junkyard lots. Then the view of Shea, a stadium the shade of working class blue. On game nights, you could just make out the half-hearted roars of the half-empty crowds. Finally, the train swerved into a tunnel. This was our Queens wasteland, all of us passengers ushered to the place we called home. Then the 7 train stalled and the lights flickered off. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jane. I'm from Park Slope, Brooklyn. I'm going to read the beginning of a short story titled Patricia, that's set in Brooklyn, 1978. The rain came down so hard the droplets leapt from the pavement. It did not stop him. Yurik leaned into the storm as he walked. Trees thrashed, traffic lights bled, the sun, a far-off patch of light, diffused against the rain. The stoplight turned green and horns screamed at him to get a move on, but Yurik took his time crossing the 7 lanes of traffic. He knew he was in trouble, not just with God, but more importantly, with his manager at work. He should have been at the synagogue hours ago to clean the toilets and straighten the prayer books, to ready the place before the morning service. But it was his wife's birthday, occasion enough he'd decided, to skip one scrub down of the house of God. His pajamas clung to his chest and thighs. Yurek was soaked, but relieved to be alone. When he'd started his walk that morning, the Brooklyn Boulevard brimmed with every stage of life. Mothers pushing strollers, children running ahead of them, teenagers in roller skates, at least one or two old men doing arm aerobics on a shaded bench. But a heaviness had hung all around, as if to smother the light. And once the first droplets fell, the sun recoiled, the sky sheeted rain, and the street emptied. A few people stood under awnings, waiting out the storm. Otherwise, the street belonged to him. His wife turned 25 today. Yurek tried to imagine what she might want for her birthday. A mop, chocolate. He'd always been terrible at these things. A group of old women huddled under the canopy of a corner store, wrapping each other's hair in plastic bags. He shouldered past them and went inside. Tinkling bells, colors piled atop each other. The shelves overflowed with foil, shrink wrap, aerosol cans, kitty litter sacks. The narrow aisles stacked with toilet paper, Jell-O, Frito-Lay bags poking from splayed cardboard flaps. A wall of Hostess, snowballs, cupcakes, Twinkies, double tender finer donuts. The cashier, a frail old woman in a clear bonnet, lifted her pale face from a crossword puzzle to acknowledge him. His house slippers squished beneath him through a pathway of Windex and Clorox. A bald man with arched white eyebrows grinned at him from the labels of cleaning products. "What you looking for?" a man's voice demanded, and Yurek darted his eyes across the row of faces as though he might find the speaker among them. A heavy-set man with a charcoal mustache stood against the far back wall, studying Yurek. He scuffled deeper into the aisle, out of the man's sight, lifting a heart-shaped Whitman sampler to his face and sniffing its clawing sweetness. He mouthed the names on candy wrappers: Laffy Taffy, Pixie Sticks, Jujubes. The sounds of words and how they always felt in his mouth changed in English. He'd picked up the habit of practicing his reading wherever he could, examining billboards and store signs and leaflets stuffed into his hand on the street. "Jimmy, get over here, I need you," the old woman hollered from behind the register. The man grunted. "All right, Ma," he said, and made his way to the front of the store, turning to Yurek as he passed. "This ain't no museum," he said. It was the soothing numbness of stores that Yurek liked best. Their many items ordered and labeled, aisle by aisle, piles and shelves and pyramids of countless crackling, colorful things. He could wander in a store for hours, lifting packages, sniffing them, turning them over in his hands to study their labels. Smooth words in Russian sounded harshly in English. Sharp words were dulled, their spellings inexplicable. Cantaloupe, pretzels, bologna. He had gone from Yurek to George, and there was Tyoshcha, mother-in-law, the most peculiar translation he'd seen yet. 3 words all strung together, lines connecting them, as if to take up as much space as possible. "Can I help you?" the woman's voice came from behind him now, the cashier leaning on her hands over the countertop, blinking her watery eyes at him. Her son stood behind her with his arms crossed, his face a younger, harder version of her own. Yurek shook his head, looked down at his soaked house slippers, his face getting hot. He didn't want to speak to anyone. Not yet. He had woken this morning to the dream of his wife. He had turned on his side and pulled her close to him, pressed his cheek against the wings of her shoulders, kissed the softness of her arms, ran his hands along the curve of her hip, tracing the arc of smooth bone down the length of her thigh and up again. Her breath was perfectly aligned. Their breath was perfectly aligned, and her smell, a smell like kneaded dough and apples, surrounded him. Then something crashed outside his door, a pot or pan, and Ella rolled away from him, and the bed creaked noisily, and the ceiling fan thrummed, and a car outside honked its horn, and the baby began, as if on cue, to cry, and his wife was dead again, gone from his bed. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Onnesha Roychoudhuri. Roychoudhuri, and I am also from Park Slope, Brooklyn. Well, not from there, just live there. And I'm going to be reading an excerpt from the novel I'm working on right now, and it's called In the Beginning. The city is a golem, and I've placed myself under its tongue, but it won't come to life. Every mirror that I pass a golem, and I look, but I cannot animate myself. Picture me, sitting on the stoop of my childhood home, watching the pill bugs go about their business. I reach down with a curious finger, prod one into a sphere. I pick it up, place it on my tongue, and it is utterly perfect. I roll it around my mouth, and I wait. Decades go by. I fall in love. I fall out of love. All of my friends die, except for the ones who live. I spit the pill bug out, a silvery thread of saliva, and it crawls on. I want to tell you what it is to be a ghost. Not the kind that can't be seen, not the kind that seek just one thing before they move on to the other side, not the kind that can be captured with the right camera. Let me tell you the kind of ghost that I am, the kind that watch, the kind that look and look and look. My lips, God's ears. The trouble has always been the space between the two. You can spend a lifetime trying to learn the right language to make yourself understood, and by the time you do, you've forgotten what it is you wanted to say. What I want to say is that sometimes I thought my brother might kill us all, but other times I thought I might kill them all. Sometimes it felt like that, like we'd all witnessed the same crime, the crime of us, and now we were just waiting for the right stranger to come along, the one to whom we can unburden ourselves, to say what we saw, to confess it all in a language that won't betray. On June 28, 1990, my mother locked my brother out of our house in Sandy Hook, Connecticut. It was the middle of the day and the weather was beautiful. My brother was so angry he was crying. He had fought with my mother, probably over some argument he had had with me. He thought she always took my side, and she often did. I was smaller and quieter, my rage more deeply hidden. For a while, my brother sat on the stoop, the one I've never left. But he was restless. I watched him from the window in my parents' bedroom, the master bedroom where only my father had been sleeping for the past 2 years, my mother now down the hall in a room that never got warm. I watched him pace in front of the house. He had banged on the front door, he had thrown rocks, but he still had not received satisfaction. He was a cause and he needed his effect. Dragging the hose from behind the bushes, he turned the water on full blast and directed it into the open windows. The master bedroom got the worst of it. I watched, tucked in a corner to avoid the spray as it soaked the walls, splashed across the bed. The way my brother just did. There was a pull to his anger and I orbited him, thinking that if I got close enough, I might experience the gravity of it. It was terrifying but also elating, with a tiny nugget of hope at its center, like there might be some sort of relief, like we might share it. Love goes to buildings on fire. My brother trying to put out the thing that should have been there. In California, where we were born, our hands were always covered in pine sap. We climbed trees and picked the avocados that burdened them. We went whole days without speaking, and when my brother and I cried out in the middle of the night, our mother turned her face to her pillow and wept more quietly in the hopes that we wouldn't hear her. Our father would pick one of us up, wrap the chosen one in a blanket, and carry us outside to look up at the stars. He did not ask us why we cried. Instead, he would say, "All your ancestors, all of them are there. They'll talk to you if you listen." And we would point and ask, "Who?" And he would follow the projected line of our fingers. "Your uncle, the Milky Way." "What does he say?" we'd ask. "Oh, it's very hard to hear him when he speaks." "Does he whisper?" "No," he'd say sternly. "He mutters into his beard. Everyone knows that." We weren't one thing and we weren't another, our family. For a time, the thing that held us together was that the others in our town were more dissimilar from us than we were from each other. For a time, this was enough. In the beginning, there was light and heat, and it felt like love. In the beginning, there were 8 days. On the 8th day, we sat on our couch, the frame a bone-colored scroll upholstered in maroon silk, pilled and shredded by cats, half covered with a striped sheet. On the 8th day, we imagined the others watching movies, eating meatloaf, and holding each other, while we sat there and didn't know what to say. So we decided, 7 days, that is more than enough. On a small table in that bedroom were framed photos of my brother and I, mine in a white curly-cued frame, floral dress, hair pulled back, a few ringlets surrounding a sweet smile, big cheeks. When I look at the photograph today, it seems sinister. The expression, a smile composed by someone who is aware of how they should look and tries to deliver it. My brother, hair parted on the side and smoothed across his scalp, a cream and brown-colored sweater, his mouth in a smile, his eyes elsewhere. The two photos in the same frames now on my father's desk in Storrs, Connecticut. The lower portion of my brother's photo torn away, an uneven line of white fading to the glass and blank photo backing below, like the froth left behind when a wave pulls back out into the ocean. Evidence of how my father had peeled the photo from its frame, laid the components out to dry in an attempt to salvage them after my brother hosed down the house. The question was which one of us would make it. Like Castor and Pollux, only forget the immortality. One of us was simply even more mortal than the other. Our parents watched us closely when we first hatched. I was tinier, but stronger, the one who blinked, who knew when to hide. He bigger, fearless. Heard the kind of songs that might make you mad. I heard them too, but didn't tell anyone. A phantom limb that sometimes itched, but I knew wasn't there, not really. Like my brother, too, once he got old enough to disappear from me. And how remarkable that others could see him, but not me. That he continued to move through the world without me knowing where or why or how. A kidney, a lung. I didn't need him, but we had started off as a pair, a science experiment, subject to the same conditions, independent variable, control group, only here the hypothesis wasn't fully articulated. The question, what if, simply hinted at by the grunts and moans of our parents, what now, implied in the silence that bloomed between them once all the air leaked out of the container. Thanks.